Texas Department of Transportation. God, I mean, the stories that we saw in your book were just villainous at points, and full of deceit as well. At one point, they said adding lanes to I-35 would increase greenhouse gas emissions only fractionally. The Rocky Mountain Institute would disagree. They would call it a small coal-fired power plant. So are they just professional liars, just trying to carry out the good deeds per se, and I'm being sarcastic there, the good deeds of highway expansion?
I don't know if I would go so far as to call them liars. I mean, they are using data to justify the project that they want to build. Um, so, projecting greenhouse gas emissions, there's certainly a margin of error there. But I think that like the conclusion is foregone. They are just justifying how they get there. My actual favorite example, which is also in the book, is so a lot of these studies that when you do a highway expansion, you have to do an environmental analysis. So you have to sort of justify why the project is needed. And so in the I-35 project, I-35 spans about 8 miles through central Austin. And currently, driving 8 miles in rush hour takes about 20 minutes. But if we don't expand this highway, this is according to TxDOT, by 2030, it's going to take like 45 minutes. And then by 2050, it's going to take 227 minutes on this highway to travel 8 miles. 227 minutes is like more than 3 hours to travel 8 miles. Like most people, including myself, can walk 8 miles in less than 3 hours. And yet they use that as scientific fact, saying the cataclysmic traffic congestion that is going to paralyze Austin, like we must do something about it. But it is like if you just even use common sense for 10 minutes, you realize that like no one is going to sit in traffic for 227 minutes to travel 8 miles. They simply will not take that trip. And TxDOT's models like do not account for that. They don't account for how people change their behavior faced with changing conditions. And so it's not that it's like, as a journalist, it's hard for me to say lying, but like they are using the assumptions embedded in that data are getting the outcome they want.
Mm,
When you even common sense mean, you look at that and you see that's just not possible.
right. In Houston, this is another thing that I truly believe we don't think about. We don't think about climate change when it comes to cars, at least not as much as we should. And then also the health benefits of us as a society. You mentioned how students in the Houston area would suffer from asthma at twice the rate. So this is huge. And when you talk about how, Texas is Republican led, right? And one of the main things that we always hear in campaigns is how pro life they are. But yet, if we are seeing the dire effects of cars, especially on students who are just vulnerable young kids trying to learn, suffering from asthma, why is this just completely being ignored?
That's a great question. I mean, that the right to life thing is a little hard for me to answer, for lots of reasons. I mean, another same version of that question is like 40,000 people die every year in traffic crashes. Like, why are we ignoring that? Um, Driving is actually incredibly dangerous. Like, not to mention the like downstream effects of air pollution, which kill tens of thousands of people every year. Asthma causes early deaths measurably every single year. But not just that, but like the number of people that die driving, that die in their cars, that die as pedestrians when they are struck by cars. Like it's a horrific number. And that is just sort of counted. I don't know, like that is something that is really hard for me to kind of like, how do we just accept that?
Right.
How do we accept that this is just the cost of getting where we want to go when there are other options available to us? Like there are much safer ways to get around, and mostly that's in a bus or on a train. And yet we keep building these cities, and like a lot of these highways expansions are justified through safety. But like the data shows they actually don't get safer. People continue to die as they drive more.
Right.
So I don't know how to answer the air pollution one except to say like we seem to ignore the cost, the human cost to these highways in multiple ways.
I know you mentioned a few towns. I believe you said Copenhagen was a model. Is there one in the United States that if someone is listening to this and they're still feeling like, nah, can't happen, is there one town or a few towns in the United States that could serve as that example?
I mean, the cities in the US that have the best transit, as you know, like sort of boomed before the 1950s, before we spent a lot of money building interstate highways. So, I think like New York is a great example of a city that has come up around transit and, has values accordingly. You can walk around that city, you can take transit. Um, I think what I find really interesting are cities like Austin, like Denver, like Los Angeles that are really trying to retrofit themselves to be less sprawling and less car centric. So Denver is one that like I'm watching. It's not happening. It has not happened yet. But like what I mentioned with the Colorado Department of Transportation, that the state and the city are really working in lockstep to incentivize more dense housing, to incentivize more transit. So I think that's a city that could like really transform over the coming decades. Um, I also like, a lot of cities, a dozen cities have taken out highways. This is not like a one-off to Rochester. San Francisco removed a highway. Portland, booming Portland, removed a stretch of highway right in its downtown. Milwaukee removed a stretch of highway and built the new Milwaukee Bucks Stadium on that land that used to be a highway. So there are like kind of unusual, unexpected examples throughout the US of cities like Rochester who realized like, hey, our city is declining, let's revitalize it. And the first thing that they sought to do was remove a highway.
Right. You also wrote of one couple who could not afford a home, got priced out of buying a home in a suburb just south of Austin. Then they would move into a red brick house, but the commute really affected one of them. So, how does highways and long commutes bring out sometimes the absolute worst in us?
Yeah, I mean, anyone who's sat in a commute for 30 or 45 minutes or an hour, like, sort of knows intuitively the answer to that question. Like, it is very maddening to be stuck in traffic. And certainly understand the impulse of commuters who say, hey, why don't we make this highway bigger so I can get home quicker? But what that does is just only make kind of entrench the form of commuting that drives people crazy. But this one person named Angel Leverett, yeah, she moved to a suburb south of Austin where she and her husband could afford a place to live. And she started commuting, an hour one way to get to her job. And she found that like it really impacted her mood. She would get home really irritable. She also said something that stuck with me that she really lived for the weekends. Her
Mm.
weekdays were basically like commuting, get home, have dinner with her husband, go to bed. Like there was just no space to see her friends, to work out, to do any of the other things that we might want to do with our days, that it was just really commuting. Um, and the other like very small detail, I actually did her commute with her. I was just like, hey, I'm going to drive down to your house one morning and do your commute with you. And she told me traffic on I-35 is very stop and go, but she had this like Achilles injury in her heel because her foot is just like hovering over the gas and brake every day for 2 hours. And for whatever reason, that just like stuck with me is just this tiny little injury of all the harms that are created by our highways. It's just like just the costs are just like we don't even know. We're not even tallying them up. And she just like I talked to her about like, well, what could make your commute better? TxDOT is planning to expand this highway. Like, do you support that? And it hadn't occurred to her that like TxDOT could maybe build a train instead. And once I floated that possibility, she's like, "Oh yeah, I want that." But it hadn't occurred to her that that was a possibility. I mean, because it's not. TxDOT has not offered that as a possibility, but like our political leaders could make it one. But I think it's just remarkable of like once you are stuck commuting in a car, it's kind of hard to imagine anything else.
Definitely.